Aloha aina, ano ai, velina kako. Welcome to Free Hawaii News, brought to you by the Koani Foundation, presenting Hawaiian perspectives on a broad range of topics and issues affecting the Hawaiian Islands, the Pacific, and the world. Your hosts for Free Hawaii News are Leon Kaulahau-Siu, musician, composer, diplomat, and political analyst, and Hinaleimoana Wong, Kumu filmmaker, cultural and Hawaiian language preservationist, and community leader. And now, Free Hawaii News.
Aloha nui mai a kākou a pauloa e ko Hawaii nei pai aina puni. Mahalo anui ko kākou hui ana o wau no keia o Kumuhina.
Aloha no, my name is Leon Kaulahau-Siu, and we welcome you to this episode of Free Hawaii News. One word we hear a lot in our Hawaiian culture and society is the word kuleana. Kuleana is usually thought of as a form of responsibility. In one of her newest articles titled The Living Weight of Kuleana, Activation, Continuity, and the Choice to Remain Standing, Dr. Kumu Michelle Manu states, some responsibilities are chosen, others arrive through lineage, circumstance, crisis, or calling. But all kuleana eventually asks the same question: will you continue carrying it when it costs you something? Dr. Kumu Michelle Manu, PhD and JD, is a Kanaka Maoli elite athlete, metaphysician, master martial artist, and educator. She is involved in integrating ancient knowledge to unlock and activate human potential. To tell us more about kuleana, she joins us now. Michelle, how would you define kuleana?
I define kuleana as a living relationship, not a task. People often translate it simply as responsibility, but responsibility to what? Kuleana answers that question for us. It's the relationship between a person, what has been entrusted to that person, and the consequences of how they care for that. So it is never really about rights. It's really about stewardship. And kuleana exists because something valuable depends on our choices.
Is kuleana a choice?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. We choose, how would I say this? We can choose to accept greater kuleana, if you will. But many forms of kuleana arrive before we even choose them. I know that sounds crazy. If you're not born into it, it's something that you have been trained up in and bestowed kuleana. It's much different than an individual just saying, oh, this is my kuleana, and taking it upon themselves to have. Yes, we all have responsibility, but it's different when it comes to our sacred traditions. So many forms of kuleana arrive before we ever really choose them. It's how our path unfolds. So born into the family, ancestry, a place, you have specific gifts, maybe that you run from, or that you have now accepted them and they're being activated. Sometimes you're given obligations that reveal your kuleana and your history. What is your ancestry that puts you in the right place in the right time. So if you are born into it, you absolutely don't have a choice. You always have a choice in saying, I don't wish to carry this in the ohana any further. But most times we know what our kuleana is and we accept it. Other times we can say no.
What is the best way for someone to discover their own kuleana, and how will they know if it's the right kuleana for them?
I don't think that people discover kuleana by looking inward alone. We can discover it by paying attention to what is repeatedly asked of us and what we repeatedly encounter in our everyday lives. So, what problems keep finding us, what people naturally trust us with, what work continues even though no one is applauding. That's a big one, especially in today's world where social media rewards visibility versus stewardship. Our kuleana usually leaves evidence before it ever had a title, and I don't know if that makes sense. Once we're given a title, once we accept kuleana, we can see that we were being groomed for it all along through life's lessons. And so I think we'll know it's the right kuleana because it costs us something. Yet abandoning it costs you even more, and that's when you know that it's your kuleana.
What role does kuleana play in our ohana, or families?
Well, kuleana is what keeps an ohana alive across generations. Ohana doesn't just survive simply because they love one another. They survive because people continue accepting the kuleana and the responsibilities that no one may ever ask, give them thanks for. Someone keeps the stories, someone protects, someone teaches, someone feeds, someone remembers, and someone reconciles. And so when everyone waits for someone else, ohana disappears. That's how I think kuleana plays a part in ohana.
What would you say to those who describe kuleana as a burden versus those who describe it as a responsibility?
This is a big deal because most people will put the burden down, right? And I understand why some do experience it as a burden. But, kuleana without relationship becomes extremely heavy. Also, the thought that one must be perfect makes kuleana extremely heavy. But true kuleana carries meaning alongside the weight. The weight itself isn't the problem. When we assign too much meaning to it over and above what is necessary at that moment, it becomes very heavy. If we can look at it like we know the sacrifice, we know the weight, we know the expense of our kuleana, it allows us to carry it responsibly without being crushed by it. So if something is only exhausting, I would ask whether it is actually your kuleana or whether you've accepted someone else's. For me, as a Kumu Poʻokela Lua, after my Olohe passed, which was 7 years ago, this past Saturday, I made it extremely heavy. There were times where, which is I'm sure all Kumu have this moment of do we quit? It can become crushing. And I think when we take a breath, we separate, we give ourselves some time off, we give ourselves that vantage point, the time to connect with the kupuna, and redefine what kuleana means for us in our specific lane. My lane is very, very narrow. It has to do with wahine koa, and lua. And that is it. If I tried to branch out and become a sacred traditionalist in every way, if I didn't feel Hawaiian enough, then it would be absolutely crushing. So I think knowing what your kuleana is also allows you to carry it well and to stay focused. And also, it becomes a burden when you don't switch hats. I know this is a really long answer, but this is a heavy question. And thank you, Leon, because we have to think about this. It's never just neutral. It's never just a beautiful tide. It rages sometimes internally and externally, and with our dedicated haumana. I think that knowing ourselves and being able to switch the hats. If I, as a woman, Michelle Manu, came to uphold Lua in my kuleana, when I am treated unfairly, if I am targeted, if there's something that isn't pono that happens, Michelle feels very upset. But if I put my kumu hat on and know that this comes with the kuleana, then I can withstand anything. And it's a reminder that I have the authority to stand where I'm standing, to speak as I'm speaking, and to continue to teach those I choose to teach. So remembering what role we're in really helps it, keep the peace within our lives, and it helps kuleana not to be that crushing burden.
Does kuleana require sacrifice, and what are its costs?
Every meaningful kuleana costs us something, whether it's time, comfort, popularity, convenience. In my case, a lot of money I paid to teach. Sometimes opportunities, sometimes being misunderstood. And, the question isn't whether it costs. I think the question is what survives because of my sacrifice. Was it worth more than what I had to sacrifice? And that is the question.
Has social media distorted Kuleana, and if so, how?
Social media has absolutely distorted Kuleana, in my opinion. Others can hold a different opinion, but I think it often rewards the appearance of Kuleana instead of actual stewardship and practice. Visibility has become confused with stewardship. The popularity contest, and sometimes it feels like we're in high school again. You know, Leon, posting about a culture isn't the same as preserving it. Speaking very loudly isn't the same as carrying responsibility time and time again and day after day. I think social media, digital algorithms reward attention, where Kuleana clearly rewards continuity. And, you know, going back to the last question is we cannot have continuity if our Kuleana is crushing us. So algorithms reward attention, and Kuleana rewards continuity. And these are two very different economies that we're looking at. And unfortunately, today, I think the algorithm wins.
Would you say that the role of Kuleana is what might be called coordinated survival?
Absolutely. I do believe that Kuleana is coordinated survival. That's one of the most interesting ways to describe it, I think. There's also another saying that Ohana is the ultimate symbol of survival. And I think that also relates to this as well. Traditional societies survived because everyone carried different responsibilities that fit together. No one could do everything, although some people act like they can and just completely get crushed by that. But everyone had something only that they could do. Like I said earlier, my lane is very narrow, and I try to stay in my lane. So I think Kuleana, if we look at it, is not an individual achievement. It is truly the coordinated stewardship that allows a people to endure.
In your article, you described Kuleana as a sustained relationship to responsibility under consequence. Could you explain that, please?
You know, Leon, I chose every word carefully. This one took me a while. Sustained means it continues after inspiration fades. Relationship means it isn't transactional. And responsibility identifies what has been entrusted. Under consequence reminds us that our actions affect more than ourselves. So you can see why I chose these words carefully. So if I neglect my Kuleana, something beyond me bears the cost. Is that making myself self-important? Maybe, maybe not. If I didn't stand in my space right now, in my very narrow lane, is there someone that could? So I do feel that if I did in fact neglect my Kuleana and how I'm led in the kahea to continue, then I feel that there would be a cost for our lahui. So I think if we understand that, if we have the awareness of that, it changes how we live.
So it's really about being responsible for something meaningful so that it survives after that person who carried it. Yes?
Yes, exactly. I don't believe Kuleana is ultimately about us. It's about continuity, just like our kupuna, taught and had apprentices in every sacred tradition that we had. So every generation receives something unfinished, I think, and whether it be knowledge, language, land, family, values, ceremony, justice, health, I think the question isn't what do I get? The question is what will still be here because I lived and because I fulfilled my Kuleana. And when we think of it that way, I think Kuleana stops being personal identity and becomes an act of intergenerational generosity. So in that sense, Kuleana is one of the ways a people become difficult to erase. We already are living in, the lahui is fractured, more information on our culture from different time periods, are being unearthed and discovered. And the new scholars, which I hear there are 300 PhD students, Kanaka students throughout the world, candidates for a PhD that are, researching maybe some information on our culture that the former scholars didn't have access to. So the more that we do this, the more that we dig in, the more that we accept certain kuleana, the more it will be difficult to erase us, and the more that we'll have those fragmented pieces returned to us, and the more we'll be able to feel our own identity.
Mahalo nui, Michelle, for sharing with our viewers your mana'o on Kuleana. I was recently in Southern California at a big ho'olaulea, which is a festival of Hawaiians who are gathered together in Southern California. And this brought to mind something which is has always been with me. That for years, as I traveled all over the place, I found, of course, enclaves of Hawaiians in various places. That is, Hawaiians come together and they share and they socialize and they invite their neighbors and things like that. Very Hawaiian community minded and all that. It got me to thinking about the Pacific Way and how, as Hawaiians, this is how we are. We gather together and we share amongst each other and we remember the things about our homeland. But it also brought to mind this sort of a problem that we have, and that is because of the wide diaspora of the large diaspora of Hawaiians from Hawaii. Over 50% of native Hawaiians live away from Hawaii. We find that there may be more and more of a separation, or let's say an acculturation to the cultures where they are, than may be comfortable, and people may be losing their identity as Native Hawaiians. So I wanted to talk about this because it's not only refers to Native Hawaiians, but also I want to talk about other Pacific cultures that are in diaspora, particularly in the United States. So, do you have something to add to that?
My perspective, Leon, is that Kanaka, as well as in my experience, other Pacific Islanders that live in the diaspora, meaning that they live outside of their homeland, they live outside of their mainland. It's very, very important. It is essential for our Pacific Island people, no matter what island we come from, to remember where is our home and what is the culture, what is the rightful culture of our home based on the baseline and fundamental foundational concepts in Kanaka construct. And that may sound rather technical, that may sound too hypothetical, but breaking it down, it means that we must absolutely be centered mentally, emotionally, spiritually to Hawaii as our piko, our mainland, our motherland. Why do we call Hawaii our motherland? Because we know that the name of the akua, of the deity that in our traditional history, we know the name to be Papa or Papahanaumoku. We know the name to be often associated with also Haumea. Does that mean that it should conflict with someone's religion if they are not followers or practitioners of the Pule Honua, the traditional religion of our people? Absolutely not. It just means that we must have a familiarity so that we understand that Hawaii is our motherland and not our fatherland. Our motherland because the land is our mother. That is the framework on how Kanaka see us. And when it comes to being Kanaka in the diaspora, I truly do believe that in order for our Kanaka to increase the efficacy of their advocacy, their voice of support for what happens here in the homeland and the fate of Kanaka here in the homeland, their positionality internally must be recalibrated, it must be recentered, and it must be rethought. This is essential because the only logical way is to be advocating for a politically independent Hawaii where we, under our own terms, can determine that the citizen base outside of Hawaii, based on their ethnicity, if there is a desire to lean in on being ethnically Kanaka, as we see people galvanizing around not only halau for hula, not only hoiva'a, not only for other cultural activities, but also for Hawaiian civic clubs. With Kanaka being far more abundant on the American continent, there is an important need to understand that moving to the American continent, for whatever the reasons are, that the shift be based on a Hawaii-oriented, Hawaii-centric, Kanaka, culturally centric understanding. Without that, the current American system does not support the level of advocacy that our Hawaiians want to have back here in the homeland.
I agree with that. I think that you brought up a really good point, is that as we begin to move toward our independence, and of course, we need the support of our lahui that's scattered around the world, and particularly that most of them are in the United States. So we need to actually not only have them come home, but actually to be mentally and culturally in tune with the way, the change that's going to happen here in Hawaii, and to become part of that. And that is maintaining a Hawaiian perspective, a Hawaiian way of life, and a Hawaiian way of just doing things, because that's going to be the important difference when the Hawaiian kingdom regains its independence. And that important difference is going to be not a radical change of the operations, but it'll be a radical change of the management, of the thinking that goes behind what government does. So I think that to have the diaspora, and I don't know if I like that word, diaspora, but those Hawaiians living abroad, to have them in terms of thinking, in terms of how we do things in the Polynesian way, in the Hawaiian way, in the Pacific way, that's going to be will be of great benefit and will bring us together as the independence of Hawaii returns, the political independence of Hawaii. That we come together as a nation, not only in a political way, but also in a management way, in a thoughtful way, in the philosophical way, how we're going to manage our country, and the vision that our country will have, and the kuleana that our country will have, basically aloha aina. And these principles, those will have to be nurtured by everybody who intends to come home and be part of this nation.
You're watching Free Hawaii News, giving you the Kanaka perspective on issues in Hawaii.
There are two words that cause a lot of confusion when we think about Hawaiians or any native peoples. Those two words are the terms Indigenous and Aboriginal. Yet defining them correctly and using them accurately when we speak and write about our people is very important and often a daunting task. To help explain what both these words mean and the difference between them, we go now to Adam Keawe Manalo Camp. Raised in the homestead community of Papakolea, Adam is a Kanaka Maoli writer, poet, and researcher with a strong focus on Hawaiian histories and cultural preservation. Holding a degree in anthropology, his work centers on indigenous epistemologies, historic preservation, and the revitalization of Hawaiian narratives. He examines identity, colonialism, and cultural continuity through his research and his creative writing. Aloha mai ka'awa, Adam.
Mahalo Kumu, and it's great to see you.
What's the definition, Adam, of Indigenous and Aboriginal, and how are these terms different? Indigenous and Aboriginal.
The first thing we need to understand is that these terms are not merely descriptive. They're not merely adjectives. They are not terms that you vibe with. They are political and legal terms. They exist because colonialism exists. So with Indigenous generally refers to the peoples who trace their existence to a territory before conquest or before colonization, and who continue to maintain distinctive political, cultural, linguistic, and spiritual relationships with their lands. Indigenous peoples are not simply ethnic minorities. They are nations whose original sovereignty was interrupted by colonization. The word itself comes from the Latin term indigena, which means sprung from the land. And this term is mostly used in international legal contexts. Indigenous also has become a broad term because of the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, which prominent Kanaka Maoli, such as Pokalai Nui and Mililani Trask, had played a significant role in drafting. So Indigenous also emphasizes collective rights, self-determination, land, language, and nationhood. The term also better translates into different languages and different legal systems. And so that's why it's more prominently used internationally. Aboriginal, on the other hand, comes from the Latin ab origine, from the beginning. In English common law traditions, particularly Australia and Canada, it's been used as a legal category for the original inhabitants of a territory. So in Australia, you hear the term Aboriginal, right? And that's the preferred term for many First Nations, alongside the Torres Strait Islander peoples. When the Hawaiian Kingdom adopted English common law, we also adopted the term Aboriginal or of Aboriginal stock because we were adopting that legal tradition. So one way to look at it is Indigenous is more of an international legal term, whereas Aboriginal is usually applied in domestic laws and policies that have been shaped by English common law. Another way to think about it is that Aboriginal answers the question, who are the original inhabitants? Whereas Indigenous answers the question, who are the original peoples with continuing political, cultural, and territorial relationships to their homelands?
So when referring to our fellow Kanaka, what then would you apply most appropriately?
Both. So I think of it personally as the difference between Kanaka Maoli and Kanaka Uivi. They both have a similar meaning, right? But Kanaka Maoli is the preferred translation of the English term Aboriginal Hawaiian. That's what we usually use in the court documents, etc., in the Hawaiian Kingdom era. Whereas Uivi, which has a stronger, to me, cultural context because of the land of the bones, is also used to mean indigenous, right? So that's how I tend to think about it. I don't think of Aboriginal and Indigenous as being mutually exclusive. They both can be used depending on the context. Just like Kanaka Maoli and Kanaka Uivi can also be used together.
Might you be able to give us some examples of people in both aspects of Indigenous as well as original?
Yes. So some of the peoples that are both, where both terms have actually applied, is of course us, Kanaka Maoli, because in the Hawaiian Kingdom's legal system, we are identified as Aboriginal. So there's us. There's the Maori, who were also identified as Aboriginal in the New Zealand court system, Aboriginal Australians, Torres Strait Islanders, also the First Nations peoples of Canada. So that would be like the Ojibwe, etc. The Austronesian peoples of Taiwan are both Aboriginal and Indigenous because of the fact that, yeah, the legal system over there.
So when people hear the word indigenous, they automatically think of brown-skinned people somewhere on Earth. Yet there are actually Caucasian people who are also considered indigenous. Could you tell us about this understanding and who those people might be?
This question actually exposes one of colonialism's greatest successes in convincing peoples that indigenous people are a single race. You're not. We're multiple nations, multiple races, and indigenous peoples exist in every continent and in many countries around the world. So in Europe, for example, there's the Sami, people of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and they're indigenous. Many of the peoples in Siberia are indigenous. Some Welsh and Irish actually consider themselves to be indigenous, even though they're not recognized as indigenous internationally. So likewise, not every brown-skinned person is indigenous. An Indian, for example, who moves to or immigrates to Canada is not indigenous to Canada. Likewise, a Kanaka Maori who is indigenous to Hawaii and then moves to Las Vegas is not indigenous to Las Vegas. And that also goes, by the way, just as a side note, that also goes with cultural authority. Just because you're indigenous to one place does not mean you have cultural authority as an indigenous person in another place. So yeah, indigeneity cannot be determined by skin or skin color. It is determined by historical continuity, genealogy, collective identity, cultural authority, and political relationship to one's ancestral homelands. What colonization did is that it racialized indigenous peoples because race became one of the principal tools of domination. But indigenous identity has never depended on skin color. And likewise, just as another note, whiteness is not a race. It is a political identity forged through colonialism. Likewise, the contemporary meaning of haole did not always exist. As settler colonialism transformed Hawaii, haole increasingly became associated with Euro-American settlers that dispossessed Kanaka Maoli of their lands and our sovereignty. But both white and the modern racial understanding of haole reflect histories of power and domination.
When we hear the word indigenous, we mostly think of indigenous peoples existing inside of a settler colonial state. Yet, people like Tongans, for example, who have always been the majority people in Tonga, are considered indigenous and they do not live within a settler colonial state. How can that be?
We have to understand that colonization is not the source of indigenous identity. Our existence does not begin with the arrival of the Europeans. We were indigenous before Cook, before the missionaries, and before the colonial empires reached the Pacific. Settler colonialism did not make us indigenous, but it did possess indigenous peoples of our lands, governments, languages, and our futures. So in the case of Tongans, for example, Tongans were not directly colonized, and they continue to remain indigenous because they descend from the original peoples of those islands, and they have maintained a enduring relationship with their homeland through genealogy, language, culture, and political continuity. The fact that Tonga remained an indigenous monarchy rather than becoming a permanent settler colony does not diminish or negate Tonga of its indigenous status. Also, indigeneity does not require becoming a minority within a settler state. It requires historical continuity within ancestral territory and the continued existence of a distinctive people. Settler colonialism is this one historical experience that many indigenous peoples like us have in common, but it is not the main criterion of indigenous identity in itself.
Were European countries the only ones who practiced or perpetrated colonialism, or were there others?
Human history contains many examples of empires. There's the Roman Empire that colonized much of Europe and the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire, which expanded across 3 continents, Imperial China, which absorbed Tibet, Japan colonized Hokkaido, Okinawa, Taiwan, Korea, and parts of Manchuria. The distinction is not whether Europeans invented colonialism. They did not. The difference is that European colonialism became global. It combined maritime technology, capitalism, industrialization, scientific racism, Christianity, and settler expansion into a worldwide system that transformed every continent on Earth. And it still continues to transform our legal systems, our social behaviors, our economic systems, and our political systems today. It created the modern racial order as well, in which white became a political identity that absorbed English, Irish, Germans, Italians, Ashkenazi Jews, and many European peoples into a single category that then allowed them to justify their domination over indigenous peoples as well as Black and African peoples. This is why indigenous scholars often focus on European settler colonialism, not because other empires didn't exist, and not because Europeans were the only ones practicing colonialism, but because European colonialism produced the contemporary international order, the modern nation states, the global capitalism, and the legal structures that indigenous peoples continue to confront today. So the central question is not simply who conquered whom. The central question is who continues to dispossess indigenous lands, who continues to exercise political authority over indigenous nations, and who benefits from the ongoing structures of colonialism. The terms indigenous and Aboriginal came from outside. It came from European colonialism and legal structures. We have to come to the point where we identify ourselves as Kanaka Maoli or Kanaka Uivi. That to me is the more important term. That to me is it is a matter of reclaiming who we are outside of the structures that imposed itself on us.
Thank you so much, Adam. Mahalo for joining us today, and we have truly benefited from hearing your insights.
Today on my Foreign Affairs report, we will be discussing what does the Minister of Foreign Affairs do. In 1840, King Kamehameha III, in council with his closest advisors, did an extraordinary thing. The undisputed ruler of the Hawaiian kingdom did something that no other monarch in the history of the world had done before. The second son of King Kamehameha the Great, King Kamehameha III, you could say, arranged his own demotion by willingly and purposefully replacing his own rule as an absolute monarch into that of a constitutional monarch. There were no uprisings, no coup, no foreign pressure, no economic collapse forcing the king's hand. The push came from the throne downward because the king and his advisors believed that it would be best for the people and for the nation. There is only one other time this kind of a change had happened, and that was just recently in 2007 when the king of Bhutan changed his country's governance from an absolute monarchy to a parliamentary democracy. Back in 1840, by issuing a constitution for the Hawaiian Kingdom, King Kamehameha III created a government with three separate branches: the executive branch, with himself the king as the head of state and the prime minister as the chief executive; the legislative branch, with the House of Nobles and the House of Representatives, which was elected by the people; and thirdly, the judiciary branch, which was the Supreme Court and the lower courts. The king appointed a cabinet council to assist in the operations of the kingdom. They included the Minister of the Interior, Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Finance, and the Attorney General. In the absence or incapacity of the monarch, according to the provisions of the Hawaiian Constitution, the Cabinet Council becomes the Council of Regency to take over the duties of the absent monarch. When a lawful government has been impaired, as the Hawaiian Kingdom had been under the illegal rule of the Republic of Hawaii, 1894 to 1898, and the illegal occupation by the United States, 1898 to the present, the people have the right, nay, the legal obligation, to vigorously advocate for the end of an occupation and the return of the lawful government. It was under these circumstances that I was appointed by the interim government, Keaupuni o Hawaii, in the year 1997 as the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, then in 2000 as its Minister of Foreign Affairs. Over the years, many interim and/or provisional governments have come and gone. Some are still operating. Of all of them, I am the only foreign minister that has been on the job since the turn of the last century. So, what does the Minister of Foreign Affairs do? The job of the foreign minister is to conduct foreign affairs. A better term is foreign relations. That is, to develop and maintain relations with other countries concerning diplomatic, trade, cultural, people-to-people, nation-to-nation, mutual security, environmental, and other relations. My job has been to tell our story and explain our situation to the international community. I'm also there to learn about and offer what we can to the concerns that others have. It's a two-way street. That requires traveling to other countries and places where the international communities meet, getting to know the people, and developing lines of communication. What many of them didn't know is how prominent the Hawaiian Kingdom was on the global stage during the 19th century. Our kingdom was a bona fide member of the family of nations, an exclusive club of recognized sovereign nation states. Our little island nation was a vibrant country with diplomatic representatives in 136 cities in 26 countries around the world. Hawaii was an early member of the Universal Postal Union, the biggest multilateral treaty body in the world at the time, and provided the roster for the creation of the League of Nations, and eventually in 1946, the United Nations. As the Minister of Foreign Affairs, not only do I get to tell our story, I get to share our aspiration for a free Hawaii. I get to share with diplomats, heads of states, and others in the international community about our movement to free Hawaii and to invite them to be a part of the movement. It has been a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice by many to keep our efforts going, but it has also been extremely gratifying. Most of our patriot warriors have been focused on seeking legal remedies for the many unlawful acts that placed us in the current situation. That is good and well, but extremely difficult because of the lack of legal leverage to move the courts, especially the international courts, to hear our case. The path I've taken is that to which I was appointed, the diplomatic path, which I find not only more suitable to my personal style, but also to the Pacific way, or the Hawaiian way, that is, the spirit of aloha. The legal path is confrontational and adversarial. When you take someone to court, you are casting the other party as an adversary. They have to defend themselves. Essentially, you are making an enemy. On the other hand, the diplomatic approach has to do with making friends, building relations, communications, and trust, so you can work things out for the benefit of both sides, or all sides. This is why I enjoy my job. I like making friends. It's a lot more pleasant and satisfying and fruitful to make friends than to make enemies. So, with that in mind, I have for the past 26 years been building relationships and opening communication lines to the fantastic people in the international community. I have attended numerous meetings at the United Nations headquarters, both in New York, USA, and Geneva, Switzerland. I've met with representatives of the African Union, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the Pacific Islands Forum, the Polynesian Leaders Group, and the Melanesian Spearhead Group, and the Pacific Conference of Churches, and the World Council of Churches. I am an active participant in an organization of over 500 non-governing organizations in consultative status with the United Nations. Because of the exposure these international actors and organizations have had to our story and our plans for the future, there is widespread interest and support for our campaign to free Hawaii.
Next on Free Hawaii News, Kumu Hina's Mana'o.
Every Pacific person roots their identity to the land that we come from and the genealogies that we descend from. It is always, who is your mother and father? Who are your parents? Who are your grandparents? Who are your families? And from what regions on your respective island or amongst the islands do you come from? Whether Kanaka or Kane or Wahine or Mahu, it does not matter. It's irrelevant. The only understanding, the only construct of identity that holds is Mo'oku, Auhau, and Aina. And where this hits me personally is that in my own family, whether they liked my choices or not to simply live my true and accurate self, live my life according to how my spirit and my heart feel about it. I know that there are direct members of my family that were hurt by me living what my heart and spirit said. I know that they were disappointed. I know that they were not necessarily supportive, but they could not say anything to me because my role in the family meant that I had obligations. Now, my understanding of my obligations take precedent over people's opinions about me. And my obligations and duty to being a caregiver for my elders in the family are far more important than what people think of me living my authentic life. And if me being truthful with myself is a problem, it certainly isn't a problem for me. Now, what does that mean for LGBTQIA? That is a framework that is not centered to being Kanaka. It is not centered to anything that has anything to do with being Kanaka or a person of the Pacific. The only thing that I need to pay attention to as a Kanaka of the Pacific is the two words kulana and Kuleana. My role as Kanaka is to be that Kanaka. And when my family needs me to be the caregiver, when my family needs me to undertake responsibility or to shoulder duty and obligation, that is first and foremost. The clothing that I wear, the the personal details about my information, my sex and gender, the genitalia upon my body or lack thereof, whatever my reality is, that only has to do with me and me personally. That has nothing to do with anybody else, because it doesn't matter who or what I am. What matters is that I have availed myself to the duties, the obligations, and responsibilities that my family set me upon. And also that it is well within my jurisdiction and authority as someone charged with the care of my elders, that I undertake everything required of me to my fullest capacity and with my best effort. Therefore, when it came to having my very first long-term relationship, when I moved the man into my house, there was nothing that anyone could say, because I was the one that was responsible for caring for my elder. And there was no one else to take that place. And when it came to me being there for other needs of my family, I was that one. So when it comes to things like acknowledgement of my pronouns, I only need to focus on kulana and kuleana. And in the case of Olelo Kanaka or Hawaiian language, the pronoun oia is she, it is he, it is it. It is all three. And therefore, I need not concern myself to whether I have met someone else's standard or whether I meet their requirements for what is female and what is not. And if people choose to keep me in the realm of being male, I'm never one to say that I am biologically female. My life has always been female aspiring, and no matter what the modifications that I have made to my personal body, and no matter how I dress, it still does not make me someone who is biologically capable of conception. And that is a mana that I was not given. It is not my birthright, and I never tried to claim it. However, what that does mean for me is to stay focused to kulana and kuleana, where I don't have to have the responsibility of childbirth. I have the responsibility of, as in my professional life, child care. I also had the responsibility of adult care, elder care. And the most important thing was that it was fulfilled to the best of my ability. When it came to my personal relationships, my personal articulation and representation of myself, it was nobody else's kuleana. And to posture that way would have been maha'oi for anyone to do towards me. Therefore, I would have none of it. And fortunately, none of it was directed towards me. So that, in a little nutshell, is Kumuhina's very personal engage with kulana and kuleana and centering. And why that's important is because I don't need to be offended. I don't need to take arms. I don't need to allow external ideology, external mentality, non-Kanaka mentality to cloud my thinking, to create a stir in my soul such that it throws me off and such that I have to react to it. And what does that mean for me politically? It means that politically, I can only be in support of a government that is based on and governed by, driven by, determined and dictated by the culture, the rightful culture of Kanaka and these islands. So therefore, in my culture, mahu is a term that is a legitimate term. It does not require being limited to whether one represents themselves in their birth form. It does not require a person to be sexually active or non. It does not require that. To be mahu speaks to not only the physical, but the mental, emotional, and spiritual place of the individual. And what that also means is that my relationships are not determined by agreeing to the terms that have been set forth by capitalist initiative as well as religious governance over said relationship. That relationship is only governed by myself and the other individual. If we determine that we're together, we're together. If we determine that we're not, then it's not. Plain and simple. But that is Kumu Hina's personal journey with this. So you can see why when I advocate for political independence for Hawaii, it's because I'm advocating for my own place, my own rightful place under the sun in my islands, based on my culture, based on kulana and kuleana. Just because someone is mahu does not mean that they are less than a wahine, less than a kane. In fact, it's far greater. I have the responsibility to be able to shoulder from both sides of the spectrum. And in fact, the call to duty often tends to be far more substantial than the everyday kane or wahine. So friends who are tuning in, that is Kumu Hina's extensive mana'o for you all today. Mahalo.
Mahalo no for joining us for this episode of Free Hawaii News. It's been our pleasure to have you here with us, and we want to thank all of our guests for their mana'o.
Ano leila mahalo anu ia oko. No ko oko ki pa ana mai ka ho'onenea ana mai no ke apolo kalamu. Ahiki ko mako manawa ho aku. Ahui ho kako. Aloha.
We hope you enjoyed this month's episode of Free Hawaii News. Mahalo for watching. There's a new show every month, so this program will air several more times this month. You can view it anytime on Olelo's on-demand site or on YouTube. See you next time. Ahui ho, aloha aina.
Free Hawaii Broadcasting Network.